I wanted to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that saves you time and money on cross-border transactions. A previous guest, Dan Gardner, spoke about forecasting and risk. One of his central points was, as he put it, the things we're doing now are so incredibly complex, to see even a little bit into the future takes an enormous amount of struggle, and even then we're going to make mistakes. As CEO of Newroll, predicting just 12 months out is hard. As we expand, variables and risks multiply. Anything I can do to take risk off the table is helpful. In the past, I've been blind to the risk of FX exposure in our budgeting. A small movement could eat into our investment budget and compromise our credibility when our forecasts are wrong. If you want to remove risk from your foreign exchanges without breaking the bank, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Newroll, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Newroll, the board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, Jock Lennox, is the Senior Independent Director and Audit Committee Chair at Barratt Developments plc. He is also Chair of Johnson Service Group plc and Clarion Housing Group, the UK's largest not-for-profit housing association. He previously served as Chair of Hill & Smith Holdings plc and Enquest plc. Jock was also the Senior Independent Director at Oxford Instruments plc and a Non-Executive Director and Audit Committee Chair at Dixon's Carphone plc and AJ Mucklow Group plc. He chaired the Audit Committee Chair's Independent Forum, supporting best practice across FTSE 350 boards. Earlier in his career, Jock spent 30 years with Ernst & Young LLP, including 20 years as a partner. Jock, a huge welcome and thank you so much for being here. Can we start at the beginning? Over the course of your board career, what have been the three defining experiences that have most shaped how you show up in the boardroom today?
Well, I think I'm going to go just back a little bit earlier into my experience at EY first. And I just alight on three things. One was I went to the US as a secondee in my early 20s, mid-20s. And I managed to get to Seattle, which was great for a bit of work, but also a good bit of fun too. And I think why that was important was I learned that there are different ways of doing things, and not that one was right or one was wrong, but there isn't just one way. And I suppose that just opened my mind up to possibilities. And I'd like to think that set me in good stead for the rest of my career. One particular experience was I went up to Alaska and did the audit of a Native American corporation off the coast of Juneau, and I ended up having to explain to the local board, who weren't particularly financial or business savvy, why the business they had was making a loss when they thought it was making a profit. So that threw me in the deep end to explain myself in front of people who weren't wanting to hear what I was going to tell them, but I learned how to do that. And so, thinking on my feet, seeing a different set of experiences, really I found quite helpful. I then would pick on working with a company when I was a young partner, and a UK industrial group, and I think I worked pretty hard to get to know the chair and the chief executive and really gain their confidence and build relationships with them, although they were much more experienced than me, but appreciated my point of view because I got to understand their business and what they were trying to do. So as a result, I got drawn into an advisory role as opposed to a pure audit role. And I think that sort of those building blocks I learned then have been very helpful to me in terms of how I've established relations with board colleagues from all different sorts of backgrounds since. And so the third example I'd use was one in the early noughties when I led the EY work on the restructuring of Invensys, which was a UK engineering group that had been put together that had its problems. And it was, I mean, what really I learned from that was that you can face into what looks like an insurmountable problem with uncertainty, but if you really think through what needs to be done, understand the business plan, and then get the resources aligned up who can help you understand the particular issues, it's amazing what you can work your way through. And I worked on that for about a year, and we helped the company with its restructuring. And I then, in the board world, I ended up being asked to move from audit chair to chair of a UK oil exploration production company, which faced a similar challenge. And that was in 2016, I think. And we did a $2.5 billion restructuring of that company. And I was able to use the experience I'd gained in my Invensys time with that restructuring. And it was all about being confident that by facing into the uncertainty with a plan, you could get yourself to the other side, and by drawing on great expertise and support around you. So those experiences have undoubtedly shaped how I have then operated and how I get into the boardroom today.
It's interesting listening to you talk about the navigating uncertainty. It calls to mind an episode we recorded with Margaret Heffernan, who's recently written this wonderful book, Embracing Uncertainty, where one of her key points is that we're all naturally predisposed to being uncomfortable with uncertainty, and we are inclined to look for certainty where it doesn't exist, and that will often lead to false analogies and wrong decisions, and that we need to get better at being okay with things being uncertain for a period of time. Does that resonate at all? Because there you talked about having a plan to get through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's having a process and trusting your work method that it will be rigorous and help you analyze the issues such that you end up defining the question in a way that you are confident you can answer it. But you would start off from the point of view of not being able to do that. And I think the way I look at it is, or try and operate in that sort of situation, is don't try and answer the question too quickly, too early. Trust your judgment that you and the work that you do, that you'll get to a point where the question becomes much clearer and therefore, in essence, easier to answer. If you start trying to answer it at the outset, you'll find the answer is no, because you can't define the question with sufficient certainty.
Can you bring that to life? With when you first started on that journey with Invensys, what did you feel the question might have been, and where did the question end up?
Ultimately, it's having confidence that in that situation that a business plan is financeable, and so do you understand the risks and the opportunities in the business plan sufficiently well to know what wiggle room do you need by way of financial capacity in order to be able to finance it. And at the outset, almost certainly didn't understand that, but had to go through the analysis to get at the issues so you could put them in different categories and buckets and size them and all the rest of it in a way that ultimately you could put the whole thing together such you had an idea of the financial demands of the business plan. And there was no different when we were doing, in principle, no different when we were doing the refinancing of the oil company. There was at times it felt like some fairly heroic assumptions we were making. But just by working away at it and think, well, actually, okay, what is the floor and price that's implicit in this plan? Is that in any way, can we defend that? But as you work through things and get comfortable, that's what gives you the confidence, because you have some support for the assumptions that you're making. I think that plays into whenever you're making an assessment of a target, when you're thinking of an acquisition, you're thinking of the synergies, the upside in commercial terms that you can make. So what is it you draw upon to give you confidence that the judgments you're making are sensible?
One of my favourite questions that Roger Martin introduced me to was in episode 62 and 63 in situations like that is what has to be true in those situations and how might we be wrong? The pairing of those two questions to open up people's minds to thinking about the art of the possible rather than getting too hooked on whether or not it might be wrong or right. Do you have questions and frameworks that you use to sort of help navigate through the board through situations like that?
Perhaps I'm not quite as well defined as that, but I like those questions. I like to think of, what price do we want to walk away at? So, or what price would we not want to see a competitor get it at? So we actually, to help, land at a point and, at a decision point. Now, clearly there's always a bit of a grey around that. But in order to do that, you've got to have confidence around those questions that you mentioned. So, what has to be true, what has to be false in order to get to that determination. But certainly getting to some determination of what's the end point for your appetite, I think is important.
Now, you talked in your first example about the lesson from your time at EY as a secondee in the US of realizing there isn't just one way to do something. Can you bring that to life with an example on the board? I imagine it's hopefully not too often explaining that something is loss-making when people think it's profit-making.
No, well, fortunately, I haven't encountered that specific instance. I think the way I'd see that is I've had the benefit of working with fantastic people, board colleagues from all different backgrounds, from Cambridge professors to leading civil servants to industrialists, etc., all with very different experiences from mine. And I think what it's taught me is to listen to other people's point of view and why is it that they think, why are they making a point about something? What's the importance of it? And just because it's got a starting point that is different from mine doesn't negate their starting point. The professor from Cambridge, physics professor, he was particularly interesting because, he would just start from a completely different mindset and world. But his point, if he had something to say, it was always worth listening to. That's where I'd say where I see that there's more than one way of doing things, and there's no doubt. I always like to think that, when I was at EY, we all thought we were all pretty broad people, so we could put together a good business plan and blah blah blah. But one of the real things I've learned since is that in terms of cognitive diversity is the benefit of having people from different backgrounds, perspectives, debating an issue. And to my mind, there's no question you come up with a better plan. And if I contrast our discussion on a strategy now with my strategy or business plan then, it was a competition between half a dozen, all able people, but very monoculture, mono experience. So it was an arm wrestle to see whose ideas came out on top. Whereas now, the debates I'm involved in are much more considered, reflective, coming at it from different points of view, and therefore, much more robust, much deeper, and more effective.
So actually one of the things I've loved most about being in an organisation that has technology at its heart is having those engineers around, because the way they think about things is so different from other parts of the business. And it strikes me as something perhaps boards need to think more about is, have you got that engineering mindset around the table that thinks systemically, logical to a degree that most of us aren't capable of. And exactly as you say, it ends up sort of taking you places that you wouldn't otherwise have gone, and holding you to account in ways that you otherwise wouldn't have been.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're looking for on that breadth is, and it may be that the rigor of the engineer and their analysis is what you want. But what I think you have to do is understand the range of topics that you're dealing with in a particular circumstance, and therefore the skill sets and experience you need in the room to work that, which may include those experiences, but it probably includes others as well. And I had the pleasure of working in lots of different sectors in my time in the boardroom. People say to me, "Oh, well, how do you manage to work in retail and then in oil exploration and blah blah?" And I say, "Well, keep it high level, and I'll be all right." But seriously, two things I think about are, and why having the people in the room are important, are one, what is it we're really trying to do? So what is the strategy and the business plan? Do we really understand that? And therefore, do we have the right people who can have that discussion and debate? And then number two is who's doing it? So, which is all about people and organization. So again, it's about having some experience in the room of people who've been there, who can help test out the thinking about organization and people.
Now, we've talked about your formative experiences. I'm always very interested to understand where someone with the experience that you have had has seen boards add most tangible value.
Well, of course, every time we meet, we add a lot of value, as we keep telling the executives. And they, of course,
for listeners who can't see you, you are smiling as you say that.
I think there's a lot of value, and one shouldn't underestimate the value of the support and encouragement you give to the executives. And I think often the role of the board is to encourage the executives to go further, faster, and not to be too cautious. So if there's a risk to be taken, and we understand the risk, then let's get on with it. So some of that encouragement it can be quite tactical in the timing of its impact. But one particular instance that always sticks in my mind is we were doing a strategy day, and we all love doing our strategy days and all the rest of it. And when this was with an engineering group, and I was the audit committee chair at the time, and then became the chair at that group. But anyway, crudely, the strategy had been by a previous chief executive, had been by companies that make things, as long as it's cheap. So it was a pretty eclectic mix of businesses. So, and we had been growing. We're throwing off cash. So, frankly, we needed to take bigger bets, but take fewer bets. And to do that, we needed to get a bit more focused and organized. So we wanted to have a strategy day out of which we prioritized. And anyway, we had the day, and we all thought it was pretty awful. And we came away quite frustrated that we really hadn't got to grips with some prioritization. So we did it again, and we did it again about a month or 2 months later. And the experience of the first one meant that the next meeting was really a very good meeting. And out of that, we did sharpen up the focus and prioritized. And that was really a bit of, I think for me, an inflection point in that, in how that company evolved. And we through then that next phase, that next period, over about a 7-8 year period, the company's TSR in the FTSE was in the top 10 across the whole market. And that was all about just getting focused on what we were trying to do through that event, and really giving some confidence to taking some significant decisions. So that, I say, that always sticks in my mind as a classic adding value event.
Regular listeners will have heard me reference the Roger Martin episode where he talks about why strategy days are set up to fail typically, and talks about the antidote to that, which is to break it up into multiple days that people have too big of expectations. And he goes into detail in that episode on how people can go about that. What do you think it was that made that second day so much more effective than the first day that a board member listening can learn from?
Well, I think because we'd had the bad experience, it helped us have clarity as to what we were actually trying to achieve. And if we were going to achieve that, what would we need to do? What were the inputs that we would need in the meeting, in the time together, in order to achieve that outcome? And so it was like chalk and cheese.
Do you think you needed the bad day in order to have the good day, or could you have got straight to the good day?
I mean, if we were very good, clear thinkers all of the time, then we could have got to the good day without the bad day. But the bad day helped us sort out our thinking and give us clarity. I hopefully wouldn't have to go through that every time, but it was quite a sort of cathartic experience. I mean, I think that, there's much said about, you make strategy events a set piece event, and, it's just a tick box process to say, well, we've done that, move on. And yes, you can do that, and you can, and also you can split the event up and make it a sequence of discussions and so forth. But whichever way you do it, if you don't get to the grip of what is it you're really trying to achieve, what's success really going to look like, unless you're sort of clear and open about that, then whichever method you use, I don't think will be particularly value adding. And you can't, and I've been involved with both. And some have been good and some have been not so good. And it hinges around, the clarity of what you're trying to achieve.
It strikes me that maybe expectations are sometimes misaligned, because I've found there have been strategy days where you've had to wander, and during that wandering, it feels very unproductive. And then suddenly it comes together, and it almost feels like that wandering, and it takes a lot of bravery to create space for wandering in those sessions when you've got a lot of people's precious time available. And so it's interesting listening to you talk about that actually is happening even with the sort of the size of organizations that you're involved
with. And if you're asking yourself the question, what does it take to be the leading player, if that's that's your aim. There are all sorts of facets that relate to that, which are difficult to answer, and you've got to take time. And not everyone's not going to have the same view as to what that means. So you need to take the time so that you're seeking alignment around the board, so that then when you get to the execution, you can be absolutely supportive of the management in the direction of whatever it is, of what it is you've decided your priorities are. But if you don't get that alignment, then you'll always have that niggling away in the background, with people not being sort of fully bought in, because you haven't got you're not all quite on the same page.
Now, you mentioned audit committees earlier. You've had a front row seat to the evolution of audit committees and board effectiveness, both through your own board roles and also through your leadership of the Audit Committee Chairs Independent Forum. What, in your experience, differentiates the most effective audit committees from those who are less effective?
Okay, so just a quick commercial for ACIF, for the Audit Committee Chair Independent Forum. For those who haven't heard about it, we formed that, and I was one of the founders. We formed that about 8 years ago, I would think, something like that now. And that was born out of a sense that we as audit committees were being given more things to do and being told they were good for us. But it was just sort of like sitting at the end of a pipe that with something else just dumped on your desk to say, there you are, get on with it. And we thought, well, I'm not actually sure this is the best way of doing things. And maybe if we could influence what was being done, what was being asked of us, we could actually do the right things to answer the question as opposed to what someone else thought the right thing to do was. So we set this up and with the aim of influencing the regulator and the government. And I'd like to think we've been reasonably successful in that regard. It now represents over half the FTSE 100, same of the 250, and it does have the ear of the regulator and government in terms of any policies and so forth that are coming forward. So, I mean, I've actually got much more involved through that role. I stepped down from it sort of a year and a half ago, but I got much more involved in that area than ever I was when I was at EY. But it's been, for me, really interesting and very powerful to get your peers together to have a debate and then seek to be an influencer. I think in terms to your question, what makes the audit committee effective, I think it's really about getting engaged with the business and with the value chain of the business and understanding the risks, how it's controlled, how that can be improved, working with the people who have that responsibility within the organization. And obviously that'll depend, the key players will depend on what the value chain of the particular company is. But as a minimum, I like to work closely with and be influential with the controller and the head of audit reporting to the CFO, and sort of see there's a little triangle there. Because if I can help the three of them work together on control and assurance, I can help them become really quite influential in the business to move control and assurance to a level that is helpful and constructive, such that it gets called in by the business as opposed to it's kept at arm's length by the business. And so if we as a group are then interested in what those people are doing and bring them to the audit committee in a constructive way, and other subject matter experts around those domains from within the organization, then that's those for me are the building blocks to making the audit committee effective. So it's having the respect. So a lot of it's down to people and relationships with the individuals, and they feel supported and feel that someone has, shouts their corner and helps sponsor them and the organisation.
Positioning yourself for your next board role is different from landing your first. New Role Plus gives you personal expert support to refine how you present your board value, strengthen your expertise on fast-moving topics, and unlock more prestigious opportunities. Head to plus.newrole.com to find out more. You said constructive way. What does that mean? And I suppose by implication, what would be a not constructive way?
Well, I mean, by constructive, I think you're looking for improvement. How do you support the business? How do you? I always like to think with risk, and risk is becoming a sort of bigger factor in a formal sense. Enterprise-wide risk management. Should it report through the audit committee or separately is always a an interesting debating point. That however it's organized, that it needs to be effective and to be support the business, not to stop the business. And I always sort of think that the mindset you've got to have is that risk. It's someone else's quote, not mine, but I think it's quite a good one too. That I would like to use. Would like to have had authorship for, but I see risk management as being like brakes in a Formula One car. The better the brakes are, the faster you go. So the risk management process is to help you run the business effectively and constructively. It's not to stop you running the business. And so I think being constructive is how do you help the business be effective rather than how do you stop the business.
Can you give me some examples, some tangible examples of breaks like that have helped a business go faster, that have come through that audit committee?
Well, I think it's sort of having the line of sight of what can go wrong, and having a culture that bad news travels quickly. So you need problems to come out of the woodwork so that so management can deal with them, and so that they because if you don't deal with the problems, they'll get rid of the value from all the good stuff you're doing, because when they do eventually get dealt with, there'll be a much bigger problem than if you nipped them in the bud early. So I say the important thing is the culture that you engender, so that people will speak up and not just have their legs taken off by sounding out on particular problems. Now that might be in a house building company, that might be around an issue on a particular site, for example. So don't pretend it's going well if it's not going well, and so it can be dealt with commercially, never mind in an accounting sense. I say for me the key thing is being confident that people will come forward with problems if problems exist.
We just recorded an episode with Professor Randall Peterson, whose wonderful book Disasters in the Boardroom looks at the 6 archetypal disasters and puts culture at the root of all of those disasters. Really interested to hear how you, as an audit committee chair, what you see as the levers you have to pull to ensure that bad news does travel quickly. And perhaps you could use some examples to bring that to life of how, if you feel you've come into an organisation where that's not the case, how you go about affecting that change.
What I like to do is to go and see how things work. So, by doing visits, by going on site visits, etc., and by speaking to the people who are responsible at the coalface, to hear about what they're saying about particular issues, what they're doing, problems they've got, so that and then does that accord with what I'm hearing at the top of the organisation? Is the messaging the same? And for me, that's quite an important bellwether, that because if the culture of the organisation is a positive one, then I should come away from a visit with a sense that the messages I've got and the sense of the organisation of what's good and bad is not news to me. It's reinforcing what I'm hearing up the line. If it's not, then I would have I'd have a problem. So, for example, I spent quite a bit of time with the building safety team, which we got established at Barratt, in light of all of the building safety issues that post Grenfell that there had been, which of course was just an awful tragedy. I've seen that us establish a team. Was sort of been quite pushy in relation to that and where they report to. So I went and spent a day with them relatively early on and said, right, I want you to take me through exactly what are you doing to control the work we are doing. So take me through some of the sites we've got. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time on projects, both when I was in the EY world and then subsequently with the sort of boards I've been involved with. So I've spent quite a bit of time going through complex construction type projects. So I said, well, take me through it. And then I want you to take me out to one of the sites that we've got running. And I want you to show me exactly what we're doing on the site and talk me through it so I can see that what is on the site is the same as what you've just told me in the classroom, taking me through the sort of the paperwork. So by going through that, I then have confidence that what I'm hearing up the line accords with what they're doing on the ground. And also those folks know I know, and therefore respect me, and I've taken the time. So they then respect my interest. So if I ask them then subsequently, if I bump into them and ask them about, is there a problem on this, or is there anything I need to know on that, they'll tell me. So by building that line, that direct line of communication, I'll hear about things. Now, in that situation, I would be confident I'd hear the bad news up through the management line, because I think that cultural strength is pretty positive. But it's doing things like that that I think for me is important to get beyond the reporting and really get to the people.
If I understood you correctly there, it sounds like there's a parallel with what Jeff Smart talked about in episode 77 as a threat of reference check, where when he's assessing people, he asks them, what will this person say about you when I call them up? And the implication is I will call them up, so it forces them to be honest. And it sounds like you're doing the same by getting them to lay out the way they see it in the classroom, but you're telling them before they lay it out that you're going to go with them and view it in person, so that keeps them honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's not set up in quite as overt a way as that, other than they know that's what we're going to do. So it better be it better be open, otherwise I won't be happy.
And how do you get around the risk of a say-do gap? I guess visiting the operations itself helps a little bit, but I'll never forget, I remember doing we had an investment in South Korea, and it was when I saw this incredible cultural gap where we sat there as an investor group, thinking we were agreeing something, and then realizing sort of 3 months later none of what we thought had been agreed. I guess there's always the risk that when you're talking with people, they say what they think you want them to say, but in reality something else is happening. How do you get behind that?
Well, I think that you've got to show me. So we have put in a complete new building fire safety process. So I've had that, and that's now been in for several years, and I had that explained to me. But again, I went to a building where we were using it, and I said, right, now take me around the building and show me what we're actually doing. Show me the evidence of what we have done. So, I mean, there is a way of doing in that situation. If you've got a complete, and that's typically, what I'll do. So I'm on I chair Clarion, the large housing association. So a month ago, I'd said I want to go out with one of the repair guys and see what we're actually doing on the ground and understand. I want to see the system that he's using to undertake his work, how good that is. I want to talk to him about what his issues are, etc. So I spent the best part of a day in Islington, in his van, driving around while he was fixing taps in apartments and fixing doors and all the rest of it. So, I mean, in that 4 or 5 hours I spent with him, I learned a huge amount about the culture and the systems by seeing them in practice, far more than I would have done had I just sat in the office and received reports. So I know that he is well prepared. I know that his systems inform him. I know that it's difficult for him to diagnose a problem before he gets to an apartment. And that's an area of weakness for us that we have to work on. So I know all that because I've seen it and I've talked to him about it, about what would make his life better. But in that sense, in that situation, I'm on the same side as somebody as opposed to investing in them, where perhaps you're not quite on the same side. So getting past that cultural gap is slightly more challenging. But again, I think it's, you've got to make a judgment on the people at the end of the day to show me what is it you're doing. And then I can believe them.
It's interesting. You're reminding me there of Charles Allen, who in episode 72 was talking about how he sort of assesses a CEO, and what he talked about was spending lots of time with them, and like he would go and travel with them because he says, anyone can fake it for an hour interview, but you go on a long haul flight with them and sit next to them, everyone shows their true selves. And actually, it sounds like when you're with that individual, you're spending 5 hours with them. That sort of stuff is going to start to come out if there is an issue there. I imagine with the amount of experience you have had that there have been times when you've been caught out and got it wrong. Curious to hear, for a board member listening to this who is newer to it, who has not had the experience you've had, can you share an example and the sort of lessons you've taken from those times?
Well, I'll see if I can think of a specific example, but I think it's best not to assume, and maybe that goes back to my sort of auditing, training and so forth, where one was always, demanded you had to look for the evidence to support an assertion. So that's kind of always in my
trust but verify.
Yeah, is always in my mind, and you got to do it in a polite way that's non-threatening, but. There are people I have worked with where I've just doubted whether they have. Did I really believe what they were saying? And so if I have a doubt, then I will follow up to find out whether that what I've been told is actually supported or not, or whether it's just someone blowing it off because they don't really know the answer. So if people are flanneling, giving you some very general answers, seem to be playing back to you what you've just said to them, I think there are indications like that certainly tell me that the person I'm speaking to doesn't really know. And would like to say to people, it's okay to say you don't know, but don't try and persuade me that you do know if you don't know. And I think so you've just got to trust your instincts in that regard and look for the evidence to verify, as you put it. And if you're not happy with what you're being told, don't accept it. Revisit it.
Jock, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
I will see what I can do.
Best book every board member should read, and why?
I did think about this, the question. I did get pre-warning. I quite like Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker. Why? Because I think it tells you that principles are important.
Most impactful question you've ever heard in the boardroom?
What happens if we don't do this?
Boardroom behaviour that irritates you most?
Saying we should do something because we've done it elsewhere and this is what happened.
Most valuable board ritual?
The time together.
Favourite quote?
Hasten slowly.
Your most significant professional insight?
From the advisors and the lawyers when I was doing the financial restructuring in the oil company I referenced earlier.
And what was the insight?
Well, they were just fantastic in keeping us out of harm's way, because there are all sorts of minefields to work through.
The worst professional advice you've ever received?
I think I struggle with that, but I think if you have a worst, it means you've either chosen the wrong people or you've asked them the wrong question.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
I think how best to work with people, how best to influence people in that setting.
Can you expand on that?
Take your time to then make your point and be quite clear with the point you're making. And don't think you have to say a lot to achieve a lot.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
When we let a project continue to develop and expand because it was going to be bigger and better, and it just ended up being a larger catastrophe. I think, what have you learned? If you think something's wrong, then stop it, call it out, trust your instinct.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
I'd say I'm more considered and thoughtful about others, and much more interested in others, as opposed to getting my own view across.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
Enjoy yourself, back management, and trust your instinct.
Back management?
Support them.
How do you know when it's time to change them, if that's your mantra?
I have been involved with some, executive changes, and that's when we decided the horse had run its course. But if you have management, you need to back them, support them.
Sounds like an echo of Sir Nigel Rudd with I'll back you till I sack you.
That would be a good way of putting it.
Jock, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and wisdom.
My pleasure. Enjoyed it.
If you're ready to position yourself for the next stage of your board career, with expert advice behind you, New Role Plus can help. As a listener, you get 10% off. Head to plus.newrole.com and use code ENTER at checkout.